I'm 86 years old, and I want to tell you something that took me most of my life to fully understand. Oatmeal is not breakfast food, oatmeal is medicine, and the reason most people will never experience what I'm experiencing right now, walking without a cane, thinking without fog, sleeping without pills at 86, is because they never understood what they were actually eating. They saw a bowl of beige grain and thought, bland, cheap, boring. And in that dismissal, they walked away from one of the most powerful biological tools in human nutrition. Let me start where almost everyone starts, which is the surface. Most people think oatmeal is good for you because it has fiber. That's like saying a cathedral is beautiful because it has bricks. Technically true, profoundly incomplete. The fiber story is just the opening sentence of something much longer and much more important. Because the fiber in oats is not generic fiber. It's not the kind of fiber you get from a supplement or a piece of whole wheat bread. It's a specific, structurally unusual compound called beta-glucan. And beta-glucan behaves in ways that most fibers simply don't. Understanding that difference is the beginning of understanding everything. Beta-glucan forms a viscous gel in your digestive tract, not a dry, scratchy mechanical fiber that just adds bulk. A gel, thick, sticky, slow. And that gel surrounds everything else in your stomach, the sugars, the fats, the proteins, and dramatically slows their absorption. Here's what most people miss entirely, that slowing down is not a side effect. That slowing down is the medicine. When glucose enters your bloodstream slowly, your pancreas doesn't have to panic. It doesn't flood your system with a massive surge of insulin. And when insulin doesn't spike, it doesn't crash. And when it doesn't crash, you don't get hungry 2 hours later, you don't get irritable, you don't get the shakes, you don't reach for something sweet. The entire hormonal cascade that drives metabolic disease, why, the cascade that has quietly dismantled the health of so many people I've watched age and collapse around me, that cascade simply doesn't start. Not because you ate less, because you ate the right structure, but it goes even deeper than that. Beta-glucan doesn't just slow absorption, it feeds things. Specifically, it feeds bacteria in your gut, bacteria that your immune system depends on for its survival and proper function. In my generation, we didn't use the word microbiome. We didn't know that word existed. We just noticed that certain people stayed healthy into old age and certain people didn't. We attributed it to luck, or genetics, or the will of God. Now science has caught up to what those 65 years of oatmeal were quietly doing in my body. The beta-glucan was feeding bifidobacteria and lactobacillus strains deep in my colon, and those bacteria were producing something called short-chain fatty acids, particularly a molecule called butyrate. And butyrate is the primary fuel for the cells lining your colon, not a supplement to those cells, not a bonus, the primary fuel. It keeps that lining intact, tight, sealed. It keeps it from becoming permeable. And a permeable gut lining, a leaky gut in the language people use now, is the beginning of almost every inflammatory disease you fear most. Inflammation. That's the word I need you to hold on to, because this is where the story transforms from useful to profound. Chronic low-grade inflammation is the common engine behind heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, and most cancers. Because the vast majority of people walking around right now have this engine running constantly inside them and they have no idea. They feel vaguely tired and they call it aging. They have joint pain and they call it getting older. They have brain fog and they assume it's normal. None of that is normal. All of it is inflammation. And every single morning for 65 years, I was quietly, consistently, systematically turning down that engine with a bowl of oats before I ever walked out my front door. The real power is in the consistency. This is the thing people misunderstand in both directions. They think oatmeal should fix something immediately, or they think it's too mild to matter much at all. Neither is true. The mechanism here is cumulative and deeply biological. You are reshaping your gut flora over months. You're training your immune system over years. The bacteria that thrive on beta-glucan don't colonize your gut in a week. They establish themselves gradually, crowding out inflammatory strains, building a community that changes how your entire body regulates itself. I didn't eat oatmeal for 65 years and stay healthy in spite of nothing happening. I stayed healthy because of exactly what was happening. Slowly, invisibly, every single morning, compounding the way interest compounds in an account you're patient enough never to touch. And here's something almost nobody talks about. The cardiovascular protection in oats goes far beyond the cholesterol story, which is already the most well-known benefit. Yes, oats lower LDL cholesterol significantly, Yes, the beta glucan gel traps bile acids in your intestines, and your liver has to pull cholesterol from your blood to make replacement bile acids, and your LDL drops as a result. That's real. That's thoroughly documented. But there's a deeper layer. Oats contain a class of antioxidants called avenanthramides. They're found almost nowhere else in the natural world. They are unique to oats, and avenanthramides do something remarkable. They directly suppress the expression of inflammatory molecules inside the arteries themselves. They protect the endothelium, the thin single-cell thick lining inside every blood vessel in your body. When that lining is healthy and intact, blood flows freely, vessels stay elastic, blood pressure stays regulated. When that lining is chronically inflamed and damaged, you get plaques, you get clots, you get strokes and heart attacks and the sudden violent endings that happen to people who seemed fine until they weren't. 65 years of avenanthramides, 65 years of protecting walls that nobody could see, but that I am now entirely depending on to keep me here, standing, talking, walking to my kitchen every morning. Let me bring this to the brain, because that is where most people my age are most afraid, and with good reason. The brain has its own immune cells called microglia, and when inflammation runs chronically high throughout the body, those microglia become overactivated. They start doing something devastating. They attack the connections between neurons. They prune synapses. They literally dismantle the architecture of cognition. This is not a metaphor. This is the physical mechanism behind cognitive decline. And it doesn't begin at 70 or 75. It begins decades earlier in a body that has been metabolically inflamed for years, quietly, without symptoms you'd notice until the damage is already done. The blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to seal the brain off from the inflammatory chaos of the bloodstream, itself becomes permeable when systemic inflammation is chronic. Inflammatory molecules that have no business being in your brain slip through. Your microglia mobilize to address them. They become exhausted and dysregulated, and they begin to fail at the job of maintaining the brain you need. Every morning I ate oatmeal. I was not thinking about microglia. I was not thinking about my blood-brain barrier or my endothelium or my short-chain fatty acid production. I was eating breakfast. But my gut bacteria were producing butyrate that was reinforcing my intestinal lining. My arterial walls were being guarded by avenanthramides no other food was providing. My blood sugar was stabilizing in the hours after eating, keeping insulin from remaining chronically elevated, and chronically elevated insulin, we now understand, is one of the primary drivers of Alzheimer's disease pathology. Some researchers call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes for precisely this reason. The metabolic protection I was building every morning was, without my knowing it, protecting the organ I would most need in the decades ahead. Now the practical application, because all of this is worthless if it stays abstract. What you eat matters. How you eat it matters more than most people understand. Not instant oats. Instant oats have been processed so aggressively that the structural integrity of the beta-glucan is largely destroyed. The gel doesn't form properly. The glucose absorption is fast. The entire mechanism we have been discussing depends entirely on structure, and instant oats have had that structure beaten out of them by industrial processing. Rolled oats, steel-cut oats, those are the forms that preserve what you need. That gel has to form. The physics of digestion have to slow down the way they're supposed to. You cannot shortcut the biology. Cook it plain or nearly plain. The additions most people make, sweetened syrups, large amounts of sugar, flavored packets with ingredients you can't pronounce, they don't destroy the beta-glucan, but they impose a glycemic response on top of it that partially defeats the purpose. Fruit, yes. Nuts, yes. Cinnamon, which has its own insulin-sensitizing properties. A small amount of honey if you want it. Build on the mechanism. Don't work against it. You're not just eating breakfast. You're constructing a metabolic environment first thing in the morning that sets the hormonal and biological tone for every system in your body for hours afterward. And eat it early. This is not simply a preference. There is a documented phenomenon called the second meal effect, where a fiber-rich breakfast with slow glucose release actually blunts your blood sugar response to lunch as well. The gel that beta-glucan forms doesn't disappear after an hour. Its effects on intestinal transit and absorption persist well into the morning. Your bowl of oats is still working for you when you sit down to the midday meal. I'm 86 years old. I walk without a cane. I read without glasses. I remember names and faces and conversations from 50 years ago. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because we have spent decades making health complicated. turning it into supplements and biohacks and personalized protocols and expensive interventions, when the foundation has been sitting in a pot on a stove for centuries in nearly every culture that ever figured out how to survive long, cold winters on minimal resources. They didn't have the science, they had the result. Now we have both. The body rewards consistency. It rewards you for showing up with the same right thing morning after morning, year after year, while the biological consequences accumulate beneath the surface where you can't see them. The gut flora shifts, the arteries smooth, the inflammation quiets. The brain is protected by 100 decisions you made before 8 in the morning over the course of a lifetime. I know what those decisions look like. They look like a plain bowl of oats. They look like 65 years of not skipping breakfast. They look like me, standing here at 86, still walking without a cane, still thinking clearly, still here. Start tomorrow morning. Not because you'll feel different next week, but because 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you will either have built this foundation or you won't. I built it, one bowl at a time. There's one more thing I want you to understand before we're done, and it may be the most important thing of all because it explains why most people fail even when they start. Oatmeal, like almost every real nutritional intervention, is boring. It is not dramatic. It does not come with a before and after photo in the first month. There is no moment where you feel it working, no tipping point where you suddenly understand what it's been doing. The entire value of this food is invisible while it's happening. The blood vessels you're protecting won't send you a notification. The gut bacteria you're feeding won't thank you. The microglia you're keeping calm won't show up on any test you'll ever take until the difference between someone who did this and someone who didn't becomes too large to ignore, which is usually somewhere around your 70s and 80s when it's far too late to build the foundation you needed to have been building for decades. This is the trap of modern health thinking. We reward what feels immediate and dramatic, and we ignore what is quiet and consistent and slow. Oatmeal is quiet and consistent and slow, which is exactly why it works, which is exactly why most people abandon it, which is exactly why I've been eating it every morning for 65 years while watching people around me age in ways I haven't. The boring thing, done every day without fail, is almost always the most powerful thing. Remember that, not just for breakfast, for everything.